In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the short answer question on the AP History exam and give you some tips on how to write effective responses to these questions. The video will be kind of generic in nature. It'll cover all types of short answer questions. Each of the different types that you'll see throughout the year and on the exam will be explained more deeply in separate videos. Let's start by placing the short answer question in context of the overall AP History exam. So in May, when you take the exam, you'll start with the multiple choice section. You'll answer 55 stimulus-based questions in a span of 55 minutes. After a very short break, you will then begin the short answer part of the exam. There will be 4 short answer questions that you are given. You will respond to 3 of them. The first and second ones are mandatory. You have to answer those. And then you will pick either the third or the fourth to answer at that point. You have 40 minutes to write these 3 responses. So if you do the math, that's a little more than 13 minutes each. Now the 40 minutes is a free-flowing period of time. So if you want to spend a couple more minutes on the first one, you certainly can. It just leaves you a little less time for the others. In class and when at home and whenever we practice the exam, we'll always try to stay within that 13 or 14 minute time period so we get used to how quickly we need to work through these. After the short answer part of the exam, there will be a more extended break, and then you will write the 2 essays. The 2 essays, the DBQ essay and the so-called long essay, both will be explained in different videos. As mentioned, there are different types of short answer questions, and there will be a video on each of the 3 types to make you more familiar with what they look like and how you want to approach those and write each response in a slightly different way. This video, again, will just kind of give you general advice on how to write short answers. The 3 types are listed here. The first type is called a secondary source. In that one, you'll be comparing arguments or claims, or if you want, theses, by 2 different historians on the same general topic or the same time period or historical era. You're going to explain how the 2 historians take a different view on that topic, and then you're going to offer evidence, historical evidence in support. The second type is called the primary source. Here you'll be given a primary source document, which may take the form of text or a photo, could be a cartoon, a map, and you will be asked to analyze that. The third type is what I kind of nicknamed the straightforward type. They call it the no stimulus type. But here there is no stimulus, no primary or secondary source, no photo or cartoon or map. It's simply a straightforward question that you'll be answering. It's of that type where you'll have a choice. Which of the 2? You'll notice that the first one usually is from earlier American history through the Civil War and Reconstruction. The second type is more modern American history, kind of beginning with the Civil War and approaching the modern day. Now, on the right-hand side of this slide are the 3 major types of historical reasoning skills that you'll see really throughout the course, but particularly when writing short answers or essays or DBQs. All 3 involve the letter C a great deal, and you want to be very familiar with the different skills necessary to write these types of responses. So very briefly here, when asked to compare things, that means we're both identifying but also describing and explaining the similarities and or differences between 2 things. Could be 2 eras, could be 2 developments, but we're looking for similarities and differences. Causation is asking you to describe and explain either the causes or the effects of a historical event or development, and often both the causes and effects. And then finally, continuity and change over time asks you to explore how developments or trends over a broader span of history either show continuity, similarity, or how they represent change, how things have changed. We'll be discussing all of these reasoning skills throughout the course, really almost on a daily basis. But we'll want to remember and always look to see which of these are we asked to apply anytime we're asked to write. All right, with that, let me introduce you to some very basic tips on writing your response to a short answer question. Now, some of these might apply to all forms of writing, so keep them in mind, but a lot of these are specific to the short answer question. First of all, you'll see that every short answer question has 3 parts, usually an A, B, and a C. It is highly recommended that you read the whole question, all 3 parts, before you answer any one of them. Get a feel for what the whole question is about. What is it that they're really asking you to show that you have knowledge of? Sometimes students will make a mistake. They'll answer part A without looking at part B, and they'll realize that they wrote something in part A that really was meant to go in part B. Now, while that's not the end of the world, it could mean double work, and that would mean a waste of your time. So get a feel for the whole question. As mentioned just a couple minutes ago, identify and think about the historical reasoning skill that each question requires. Okay, it should always be one of these 3. And as the year progresses, you should feel more and more confident about what that actually means, what it asks you to do. But hone in on that right away. Are you being asked to compare things, for example, show change over time, explore the causes of events? Be aware of that, because one of the biggest mistakes students make whenever they write is they will fail to answer the question as it is asked. So if the question is asking you for causes and you're talking about effects, you're not going to earn any points. Read questions very carefully. I mean, this kind of builds on the first 2 points. But ask yourself, what exactly am I being asked to do? For example, when it is causation, what in the question is the cause? What might be the effect? Stop and apply those things. If you're asked to compare, what 2 things am I really comparing? These may sound like obvious questions, but a lot of times students miss that. They don't realize what the cause or the effect is. Take a minute to think about that and identify that in the question before you write your response. If possible, brainstorm more than one possible answer to each part. If the question asks you for an effect of the American Revolution on American society, try to think of at least 2 possible answers. Then choose the one you feel more confident in, or you feel you can say more about, or speak to with maybe more specificity, and then develop that one. A good little tip, and I know I've already introduced you to this by now, is to use that SPICE-GERM acronym when trying to think of responses, particularly the big 3, political, social, and economic. Again, to my example, if you were asked for an effect of the American Revolution on America, you might think of a political effect, a social effect, and an economic effect. And then, if only asked for one, you can choose the one you feel best about. That SPICE-GERM acronym can be a real helpful friend when you're trying to think of responses to questions. This is so important, and I don't know how many times I see students make this mistake. When asked for one answer, and in a short answer, that really is all you're ever asked for. Part A, B, and C really just want one idea. Choose only one answer to the question, and then stay focused on that one response. So often students, maybe out of insecurity, will come up with one effect of the American Revolution. They'll mention it, maybe even start to explain it or describe it, and then they quickly throw in a second one for good measure. You can't earn a second point. That second answer really does nothing for you. So much better that you stay focused on the one, and you really explain it and develop it, a lot of times the question says, briefly explain this effect or cause or similarity. And students will identify it, maybe even describe it, but not really explain it. And we'll talk more about what it means to explain, but stay focused on that one response. More is not better. If you're only asked for one, choose one, make it clear and obvious what that one answer is, and stay focused on it. For the most part, each part of the short answer question can be answered in 2, maybe 3 sentences. Now, I don't want to make a rule on this. Each of you writes differently. Some of you can write better, more complex sentences that are a little longer and accomplish a little more, but still are effective. For those who aren't as confident in their writing, I always say write more, but shorter, simpler sentences, choppy almost sentences. Write as if you're explaining to a 3-year-old who really doesn't understand and you have to kind of spell it out for them. Don't try to tackle too much in one sentence because your sentence can often get long and confusing and lose focus. But for the most part, each part of the response, part A, can often be done in 2 or 3 relatively short sentences, as can part B and part C. So one short answer might only be 6, 7, 8 sentences total. And that you can easily write in, as we said, approximately 13 minutes. So remember, this is not an essay. You are answering a question rather directly. And there's a reason they call them short answers. They should be fairly short. Now, I said we would talk more about explaining. That word explain, you hear it all the time, but do we really understand what it means to explain? One thing that I find helpful for both myself and for teaching students is whenever you're asked to explain, start by asking yourself, what am I explaining? Exactly what am I explaining? And the word explain often means you're discussing how something developed or why it developed, okay? The word explain is not synonymous with describe, okay? To describe means, as the word suggests, to be very descriptive, give a lot of detail, okay? In history, we could describe an historical event by telling the story. Here's what happened. Here's who was involved. Here's when it happened. But to explain is to go beyond the what, the who, the when, the where, and to get into the how and the why. So look at some of these examples. If you're asked to explain a cause of the Civil War, it doesn't mean just identify a cause or describe what that means. It means to actually show a cause and effect relationship. How that cause, say slavery, for example, how it was a cause of the Civil War, how it led to, differing opinions on whether or not slavery should be legal, and how those divides led ultimately to Southern secession. And then, it's explaining what's happening, but showing how, why, really developing that cause and effect relationship. Or if it's a comparison short answer, or essay for that matter, show how or why they're similar or different. Not just these are similarities, these are differences between these two things, but here's why that matters. Here's why they develop differently, okay? Or lastly, in continuity and change, show how or why something changed or stayed the same over time. Okay, why now is this changing? Why don't we see change with this? All right, so keep that in mind. It's a good little tip. To explain is to develop or to show how or why. And then this might be my last general tip here, and it's certainly not the end of the world if you do this, but Remember, we're often under a little bit of a time crunch when we write. So we want to be concise in our writing. We want to get to the point. And I like to tell students, one way to do that is to avoid what I call the wind-up at the start of your response. I don't know at what point you were taught to do this, but by wind-up, I mean when you start a response by more or less rewriting the whole question. That's certainly not necessary with the short answer question. The reader of your response knows what the question is. You don't have to remind them. You can get right to your response. So I have an example here. First, this is an example of a straightforward short answer question, which we'll be looking at more in depth in a different video, but this gives you a little feel of the question before I give you an example of the windup. So in part A, it asks you to briefly explain one example of how contact between Native Americans and Europeans brought changes to Native American society in the period 1492 to 1700. First of all, this is a good example of a causation short answer question. So we'll use this to kind of give you a feel for what these look like. Remember, I said one of the first things you want to do is, if it's causation, is identify what's the cause and what's the effect in the question. So right here, contact between natives and Europeans is the cause. Okay, that's what's causing something. The effect of that, the effect of contact, is going to be changes to Native American societies. So in the response, I want to make sure that I'm putting the emphasis on what's changing in Native American society as a result, as an effect of contact. I don't want to talk a lot about the contact. I'm being asked to explain how contact brought about an effect, the change. Okay? But my example of the windup is in response to that part of the question. So this is what I mean by the windup. Every part of that sentence that is underlined is really scoring you no points. It's doing nothing for your response. It's a long, drawn-out regurgitation of the question. And it's not until we get to that we start to get an answer, okay? What this student wants to talk about is a change to Native American society, the idea that many natives converted to Christianity. You can get to that a lot quicker without having to rewrite the whole question. So what would that look like? It would look maybe something like this, right to the point. Europeans brought Christianity with them to the New World, and they converted many natives to their religion. Then it's able to follow up with an example. When we talk about how to write the response to this type of short answer, the straightforward type, I will show you that giving an example, some specific historical evidence of what you're trying to say is key, but that'll be in another video. All right, so that is our introduction to the short answer question and some tips on how to respond to them. Be sure to watch each of the other videos on the 3 different types of short answers to better help you with each of those.